Alright, so welcome. We need to discuss government overreach, authoritarianism, and civil liberties. So, first off, we absolutely cannot let fear push us towards giving up our freedoms. So, the freedoms that we have in America and much of the West, for instance, have been conditioned upon centuries, sometimes several centuries of extreme efforts. These freedoms were provided to us by great philosophers and great fighters and great defenders of such freedoms. This encompassed vision of what we see is just a thought on a piece of paper, or a constitution, for instance. In America, we're the only country in the world with a guaranteed freedom of speech on the Constitution. It's a pretty big deal. So, again, we should not let fear force us or allow us to give up our civil liberties. I'm a liberal, classical liberal at that, because I strongly believe in civil liberties. I strongly believe in liberalism. So that makes me a liberal. So in Seattle, February 10th, let's start this back. Seattle was one of the first places to have a case of the coronavirus in the U.S. So there was a flu study. This happens quite often, where they get consent forms from individuals, and they take these swabs, nasal swabs, for instance, and they test people for the flu. February 10th, Dr. Dowell of this CDC that helps organize some of the Seattle-based studies and whatnot, asked the CDC if they can use these flu studies that they already have flu consent forms, if they can use that for the coronavirus after they got their first case, in Washington, that is. So CDC said no. Dr. Chu, I think that's her name, asked repeatedly, February 24th, and previously before then, asked if they can use these. And then CDC said no. She started using them. That's without consent from the individuals. They did not have consent to use these provided samples for testing for the coronavirus. But apparently they thought it was necessary to test for the coronavirus without the consent. Like I said, we've worked centuries for these rights, and this is overreach. Now, is this significant enough to not avoid? Should she have went to try to track down these individuals to get consent? I, for one, think it's pretty gross to not get consent from individuals. You have consent for the flu to test for that, and then you get the information that you don't have consent for and test for the coronavirus. It's very disgusting. It's overreach, and defending that provides a slippery slope, a very disgusting one at that. So, February 25th, the Seattle-based lab, the Puget Sound area lab, began testing these flu tests for coronavirus. And the CDC soon after said stop. And Dr. Chu defended this. So where do you stand? Do you think that this is indefensible? Do you think that this should be allowed? Do you think that this is government overreach and these public officials should be held to the highest degree, lose their license? I'm on this latter side. I think it's truly disgusting, and it's an overreach of our civil liberties. So, in Italy, for instance, I just recently called this a disgusting country because what they're doing. So it's one thing to shut down federal highways in the U.S., for instance, I'm going to apply the same rationale to the U.S. so it makes more sense to people in the U.S. So, that's fine. I don't think that the federal government should be able to control state highways. So, should we be able to force people to quarantine should the federal government be able to force people to quarantine within certain regions of the country? For instance, should we be able to force people to quarantine in, let's say, these 5 counties? And if they leave those 5 counties, they go to prison for 3 months. That's what's happening in Italy. I think that is another case of government overreach. It's one thing to stop states to drop like protests, public protests and whatnot, that where they need approval for that organized protests for local and or state governments. That's one thing. It's another thing to stop people unwarrantedly, stop their civil liberties, their constitutional rights. And I think that's truly disgusting. Let me know what you think. Where do you draw the line? Which side are you on? Let me know. Subscribe if you want, like if you like the video, dislike, etc.